Sorry. This is offline right now. Here we go. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's do this. So this is Miss Cortez. I'm just going to make you this video going through the notes real quick, just in case you aren't able to make it to class today or you're experiencing a blackout. So let's go through. So genetic change in population. So your ICANN is, I can use a mathematical model to explain the likelihood of an organism with adaptations, terrible characteristics will increase. So we will get to that, okay? So genetic change in populations. So natural selection is not the only source of evolutionary change. So natural selection accounts for a good deal of what we see, but it's not the only source of evolutionary change. Alleles, which, if you remember, these are variants of a gene, so like alleles, blue eyes, brown eyes, can become uncommon by chance in a small population. In a small population, individuals that carry an allele may have more offspring than others by chance. Over time, an allele can become more or less common in the population. So, just randomly, we could see a population who has a bunch of blonde haired people, a population who has a whole bunch of people with green eyes. So, not only can they come through with natural selection, sometimes it's just by random chance. And this is called genetic drift. So genetic drift is just the random changes of allele frequency. And allele frequency is just how commonly we see an allele in a population. So how does genetic drift happen? So natural disasters or environmental disasters, environmental change, that's one of the things that may cause genetic drift by destroying large sections of habitat. It's basically anything that's going to shrink our population. So it could also be diseases, like diseases will shrink a population as well. And the last one is colonizing a new habitat. I know I have a picture of like white colonizers getting killed by the native Hawaiians, but with that too, like species can colonize different habitats, and that's where we also get invasive species, species that are non-native coming into an area and basically killing off a lot of the previous species. So all of these situations create genetic drift, and it has different effects on the population. So the first effect it could take is called the bottleneck effect. So the bottleneck effect is a change in allele frequency following a dramatic reduction decrease in population size. Okay, so an example of this would be like during the Black Plague, Europe's population decreased rapidly. So 1 in 5 people died. So if we look at our chart over here, we can see from 1,000 to 1350 or so, we have an increase in population, and then we have our first Black Plague death. Our population drops dramatically because this is in the millions, not thousands, millions of people dying before it eventually starts to recover. Then we have a second Black Plague that has a smaller drop. So when we do this, we remove certain alleles from the population, and they're removed at random. So disease isn't selecting for one type of person, it's just whoever happens to get it. Because very like strong and healthy people can get diseases and die, and very weak people can get diseases and die. Diseases aren't picky. So basically, this creates a bottleneck effect where we used to have this giant thing of alleles, and then a lot of these alleles disappear from the population. And then we have our surviving population where over time, as we repopulate, we can see different allele frequencies. So here we had more with the yellow allele, and here we have more with the red allele. Okay. Founder effect is another one. So allele frequencies change as a result of migration of a small subgroup of a population. So example, there's a population of red and yellow beetles. If a group of red beetles is transferred to a new area, the new population from that group will most likely not contain yellow. So here we have the mainland, we have red and yellow beetles. A red beetle gets carried to an island, and that's the only thing that's going to happen because that's the only allele availability is our red beetle friend. So evolution versus genetic equilibrium. So genetic equilibrium is when allele frequencies in a gene pool, if you remember, a gene pool is all the genes available in a population. So it's when the allele frequencies, how common an allele frequency is out of all the allele frequencies available, do not change when a population is evolving. So this is a hypothetical situation because our allele frequencies are almost always changing, which is showing us that evolution is going on. So reproduction produces many gene combinations, but it does not change allele frequency. So it does not change how many dominant alleles or recessive alleles we see in a population. Okay, so we look at this perfect world hypothetical situation through Hardy-Weinberg principle. So with Hardy-Weinberg, it says that allele frequencies in a population should remain constant unless one or more factors causes the alleles to change. So you can use this to predict changes in a population, so the changes of our allele frequency. So this is how it works. So suppose there are two possible alleles. We have our big A, which is our dominant, and our little a, which is recessive. So that should be crossing instead of grossing. Crossing the alleles produces three different genotypes. Okay. So we have our homozygous dominant, we have our heterozygous, and our homozygous recessive. So that would be our big A, big A, big A, little a, little a, little a. Okay. The frequencies of genotype in a population can be predicted by these equations. So P represents our dominant, Q represents our recessive, and then when we put them together, we can determine our percentages in a population from the formula P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. Because our P squared is representative of our homozygous dominant, our 2PQ is representative of our heterozygous, and then our Q squared is representative of our homozygous recessive individuals. So in a population, black hair is P and blonde hair is Q. The frequency of B is 40%. Our black hair is 40%, that B, and little b is 60%. If this population is in genetic equilibrium, chances of an individual having that genotype are what? So we can use that so we can plug for our big B, for our big A in there. So we can see, okay, this is 16% since P squared. So we take that value for P is 0.4. So 0.4 squared is 0.16, which equals 16%. We have big A, little a, and we're going to use our 2PQ. It's going to be 48% since 2 times 0.4 times 0.6 equals 0.48 or 48%. We're just plugging in for the values, plugging and chugging like an algebra, okay? And then this should be little a, little a. Oh my gosh, so many problems on this side. So it equals 36% since that would just be Q squared, and 0.6 squared is going to be 0.36. When we add all these values together, you got it, it equals 100%. So which is 1. If the population does not show these frequencies, when we look at a real population, then evolution has taken place. So what can break us out of genetic equilibrium? So Hardy-Weinberg principles suggest that there are 5 factors that cause evolution to occur. So the first one is non-random mating. So with non-random mating, also known as sexual selection, individuals pick mates for desired traits such as size, strength, or color over picking them randomly. So this is something where we don't see genetic equilibrium often because most mating is non-random. You have things you like about someone, you pick them based on those characteristics, and animals do the exact same thing. Whether it's having the longest tail feathers or the darkest mane or the best little like birdie dance, like that's how animals also pick. So non-random mating rarely happens in the wild. Also, too, another thing that breaks genetic equilibrium is small population size, because genetic drift occurs in small populations. Okay, so that's where we're going to see our genetic drift. So that'll also break it out of genetic equilibrium because we'll have a change in our alleles. Immigration in or emigration out Individuals who join a population introduce new alleles, and those who leave take them away. So we can have a change in our allele frequency depending on who is in or out of our population. And then from there, we have mutations. And mutations are simply random changes in the DNA that have the opportunity of introducing new alleles to a population. So this could just be random change. From there, we also have natural selection. So if natural selection is selecting for different phenotypes, the frequency of the different genotypes will then be disrupted. Okay, so why it doesn't change what the genotype is in natural selection. Remember, natural selection is selection for phenotype, not genotype. The number of alleles will be changed. They will still all be present in the genotype, but the frequency of those alleles will change. So most of these situations are happening all at one time in a population. So most populations are constantly evolving. So rarely do we ever see anything in Hardy-Weinberg genetic equilibrium. Okay, so that is it for today.